Now, it does me great pleasure to introduce our fantastic co-host today. And as we always say, it gives us great pleasure when someone says yes to our invite. And today is no different. So I want to give Afrika Williams a formal introduction. And then as we normally do, I will invite her to unmute herself and to join the discussion and conversation. And I know you're going to be in for a treat. Afrika Williams is a speaker, business strategy advisor, master trainer, and coach. She is passionate about using her knowledge and personal lessons learned to equip people with the perspective, skills, and tools needed to create positive change. Afrika's life experiences as a Black woman with disabilities drives her commitment to confront discrimination and champion inclusion. Afrika is the founder of NIA Works Consulting, a cultural transformation and talent development solutions firm that fosters equity in communities and organizations, develops leaders, and creates career growth opportunities for marginalized people. Afrika has 20 plus years of experience across sectors and business functions. While working in the federal government, she supported the US Senate, the Department of Energy, and the Department of Veteran Affairs. In 2017, Afrika left public service to join a nonprofit where she stood up a workforce innovation center to train people who are blind for knowledge-based jobs and provide them paths to upward mobility. Afrika is a certified diversity professional and career development facilitator. She has been recognized by the Department of Labor for helping to increase employment opportunities for people with disabilities. Afrika gives back by serving as a mental health advocate and mentor for women and girls interested in STEM, science, engineering, and math careers. Help me in your own way to welcome our phenomenal guest today and let her just feel the warmth of all of us by being just privileged to be in her presence and to share this space. Afrika, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Feel free to greet this audience in your own way and perhaps focus in on telling us a little bit more about yourself, particularly things that we would not know about you from reading all of your accolades through your formal bio. Welcome, Afrika.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all, Dr. Nika, and thank you to your team and to your guests for joining us today. I will give you a little bit of insight about me. One of the things that I want to share just to start the conversation is that I see myself really as a bridge. I work with leaders, with executives within the organizations, but the people in the organizations, workers, are very important to me as well. And I want to say, first of all, as we approach Labor Day, thank you to second what you said, to the folks in the healthcare space, but certainly in all of the other spaces that have really kept the country moving forward, whether it's transportation, whether it's retail, food service, all of the things that we've needed to continue to survive. And there have been a lot of folks who have allowed us as a country to move forward, who maybe aren't always recognized, those frontline workers. And I do want to say, as we approach Labor Day, thank you to those folks. And that would encourage us all to acknowledge them. About me, things you wouldn't know, I am a change for me is part of the core of who I am. I've been a person that throughout my life I've always had to embrace change, and it comes naturally for me. I understand that's not the case for everyone, but because it comes naturally for me, I try to support other people who maybe are not as comfortable with change in moving forward in life, in their careers, and certainly in organizations, which can be challenging, but I really enjoy the work that I do and the opportunity that I have to impact people. So I am a mom. I have a partner. My children are 16 and 28. I am a caregiver to my son. He's an adult with disabilities, and that is something that I relate to other people who are in the workforce, who are caregivers to parents or to children who need them. And so for me, my identifying from the diversity inclusion side, I identify as someone who is Black, who is Black, a woman with disabilities. I am also, if you look out further, beyond those three things, a caregiver, as I said. I'm a woman of faith, and that is very important to me, and important to the work that I do. And I consider myself a problem solver. That's really one of the core things about me, is that I am by nature like a dog with a bone when there's a problem or issue that needs to be solved. And for me, throughout my career, it hasn't mattered if that were a technical problem or a people problem, a relationship problem, that I bring those things to my work. So that's what informs my work. It is my why. It is what drives me, are the things that I just shared with you.
No, I love that. I love that you have defined yourself as a problem solver, because that's precisely the skill sets that practitioners in this space need, because that's in essence what we're doing every day. We're solving problems that people are encountering to help them feel a sense of acceptance, belonging, so they can show up at their best. And so I love the framing there. So thank you so much, and welcome again, Afrika. So one of the things that we like to do on the Intentional Conversations VodCast is, in addition to really delving deep into some of the areas of practice for our guest co-hosts, we also like to identify what's happening just from a world perspective that has, okay, I'm going to ask that we please try to find the mute button.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I'm always appreciative of my NWC teammates who are quick to respond whenever we have some disruption to our sessions. But Afrika, just to start again, I want to make sure that we can bring in some of the events that are happening in our world, right? And this week, there has been big conversations that have been taking place about the state of Texas, right? And so I think it's just prudent for us to take a moment to have that conversation, because we know that it's top of mind for a lot of people. So I want to start with getting your perspective on those current events regarding the reproductive rights issue we are facing in this country since the Supreme Court of the United States decided to allow Texas to pass its restrictive abortion bill. How do we begin to tackle this issue from an equity standpoint? And just how are you processing that news?
Oh, wow.
I know, big question.
Big question to start. How I'm processing it is, as a woman, as a mother who's had to make tough choices. I've been married, but I've been a single mother at various points, and I know how difficult that can be. Just thinking about, I have a 16-year-old daughter, and the decisions that need to be made in my life as a woman, as well as in her life, I don't think it really should be the government telling us what we can do with our bodies. In fact, the 16-year-old says, my body, my choice. And she's well aware of that. When I think about what I feel is really an overreach of the courts, or a lack of protection for the rights that exist, I really think about the impact that that's going to have on women in the workforce. That the inability to make the choices and decisions, whether or not we agree with them, which is not our right, it is that woman's individual choice in her body. But for a woman to be forced into a situation where she must become a mother, or must become a mother again, can be, I think it could be devastating to that woman and the people she's responsible for. I'll share with you a quick personal story. I hope my family doesn't kill me, about my grandmother that is so relevant to this moment. My grandmother had 6 children. My mother was her first child, and she was alive in a time when, of course, abortions were illegal, but not only that, there were tremendous barriers for Black women to get healthcare, in terms of reproductive healthcare. And it was even illegal for her to get her tubes tied, I think, at the time. She had 6 children, and she wanted to work. She had become a single mother, and she knew that in order to survive and provide for her family, she didn't want to have more kids. So she uh, ended up making an agreement with a doctor she found who did agree to tie her tubes so that she would not have more kids. And at that point, she was then able to build a career where she went to ultimately went to the state of Tennessee, went to work for the state of Tennessee Mental Health Institution in Memphis, which is my hometown. And when I just think about what it meant for her, that she was willing to go to those lengths because she wanted her children, her 6 children, to have a good life. But she understood what the impact of having more children, that she really wouldn't be able to work. And so for her, she made a tough decision, and as well as for the healthcare provider that did perform her her tubalization or tubal ligation surgery. I think that's what they called it.
Mm-hmm.
And so to think that we're back in that moment almost it is surreal, you know.
Yeah, so I'm right there with you. I completely agree with your position and your stance on that, and I think it's a very dangerous place for people to start making decisions for women about their bodies. Yesterday we issued a statement at NWC, and this is with great credit to my colleague, Mark Travis Rivera, who is actually on today and supporting NWC's VodCast. But this is the statement that we issued. At Nika White Consulting, we believe in a person's right to decide what is best for them, their family, and their future. Reproductive rights are constantly under attack. While this issue has become politicized, we see reproductive rights as human rights. We stand in solidarity with all the local, state, and national activists, organizers, and organizations fighting to preserve a person's right to make their own reproductive decisions. And I share that because I think sometimes, even for those of us who are intentional inclusionists, right? We want everyone to feel like they belong, they're accepted. We have to also be mindful of the voice that we have and the influence that we have. And I feel really strongly that the decision that came down for Texas is going to harm so many people. And I'm really deeply concerned about that. One of the things that you mentioned as you were talking about on a personal level yourself is that you're a woman of faith. I am a woman of faith, and my faith is incredibly important to me. And I can stand here very confidently saying that I believe women should have the right to choose what happens to their bodies. And I know that sometimes that is a point of tension, because people will feel like, well, what about your beliefs though? What about your beliefs? How are you not standing for such a decision that was made for Texas? And I think it's a conversation that we have to have. And so I appreciate you being willing to engage in this dialogue with me, and to share your sentiments around this topic as well. Absolutely. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to move to another question. And by the way, we are going to certainly open it up to our audience to ask questions as well at later into our hour. But so be thinking about those questions. So today's conversation is centered on equity. And I want to ask, from your vantage point, Afrika, what can organizations do to ensure that all employees have an equitable experience in the workplace? And I ask that question being mindful of part of your messaging platform is to really make sure you're balancing the voice and the needs of the organization, the employer, and the people, the employees. And so please address that question.
So when I think about equity and how organizations can become more equitable for all employees, the first thing that really comes to mind for me is asking a question. That analytical of mine starts with asking questions. And so the question I ask is, what is the best way to let someone know you care about them? What is the best way to let someone know you care about them? And so if you think about that, for me, that is where equity starts, because the best way to let someone know you care about them, in my opinion, is to provide people what they need.
Yeah.
And to create an environment that is equitable, you need to figure out what people need. And every person doesn't need the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that organizations should be doing is listening to their people, all of their people, allowing everyone to have input, allowing everyone to contribute, to be part of the conversation, to really just express what they need. Because my needs as a single mother of a disabled child who I'm legal guardian and caregiver to are different than the needs of maybe a married father who has a wife who's a stay-at-home mom. There's a difference in the needs, and that is okay. I think to really be truly equitable, we need to focus on the individual as much as possible. Certainly, we have broader policies and programs and things like that that are in place. But excuse me. So there also needs to be an intentional effort. So for me, it is really about understanding from the employees what they need and being open and not defensive, to listening and hearing those things, even if it's feedback about leaders. I have a sign in my office that says feedback is a gift. And I really believe that, because if we don't get feedback, if we don't get people telling us honestly, without fear of what's going to happen to them, what they need and what the organization is and is not providing, what the organization can be doing better, then it doesn't allow the opportunity for the organization to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Feedback is indeed a gift. And I'm so glad that you amplified that message. It reminds me of the importance of us, really being thoughtful about this questioning frame of mind, where we ask really thoughtful questions because we are allowing authentic curiosity to help us learn and grow instead of making definitive statements and assumptions. I saw the other day where someone on social media posted the only assumptions we should be making is to assume that we don't know. Right.
Right.
And so I love this notion of we have to give people the ability to express what their needs are and how they can be successful and the support that can help them on that journey to success. So what do organizations need to have top of mind to create those types of cultures where people feel like they can freely say, you know what, I am a parent of a special needs child, and this is what that means for me, without feeling like sharing and disclosing that information is going to create some type of negative consequences or implications for them?
So one of the areas that I specialize in is psychological safety. That is critical. That means that there needs to be safe space where people can bring up issues, where they can speak freely and authentically, where there is not this fear of repercussions or reprisal if they share information, that it's not going to be held against them. They're not going to be punished for, because of the things that they need, because of the things that they can or cannot do, whether it's a person with disabilities who has to ask for an accommodation, or whether it is an employee who needs to speak up that they're being harassed at work, or whatever the issue is, there needs to be a safe space for employees to communicate those things. And if we create the psychological safety that allows people to speak freely, to be authentic, it really does elevate the organization. That is, my perception is that it creates a place where everyone can be their best self, where everyone at least can strive towards that.
Right.
Because if I can come into an organization and say, these are my needs, these are the things as a woman with disabilities, I can disclose that. And this is what I need to make me successful, to ensure that I have, that my performance is at a high level. You shouldn't have that held against you in any way, whether it's even one area when you think about career progression and promotion. I have been, through my experience personally, as well as have seen through my work, where people who are high performers, who are experts in their area, are not advanced because a leader might say, oh, well, he's in a wheelchair, so well, we need someone who can travel for this position. So we're not going to ask Joe. We're not going to promote Lisa or Sarah because this person is blind. And well, how do we send out a blind person to a client meeting? These are the things that if we address those things, if we address the bias that we have in our mind and the perceptions about people's lack of ability because they have disabilities across the board. There is this perception that for a lot of people, now there are a lot of us who I feel are a little bit more advanced in our understanding, but there are a great number of leaders, I think, who don't get that women who are mothers can be promoted and be successful, that people who are with disabilities can be promoted, can be groomed and mentored and be successful. And I think that's something that's absolutely missing, that we need to focus on and that organizations should be focused on, because people are no longer going to support your organization either internally as employees or externally as clients and customers if you are not including them.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes people with disabilities who have a lot of skills, who spend a lot of money on various things. And I think some companies get that more than others.
Yeah, there are a lot of activists that are in this space very specifically, and really trying to advance the conversation around disability justice, who are frustrated that these conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion are excluding people with disabilities. It's not as pronounced as they think that it needs to be. Are you of that same persuasion? I'm just curious as to.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I've been a disability advocate for over 12 years, and I've been an advocate for people with MS because my ex-husband was diagnosed with MS and had to leave his career as a Capitol Police officer, as well as with people who have vision related disabilities or visual impairments, or even for people who have mental health related disabilities. For me, because my disabilities included mobility related disabilities, at various points, cognition, and even mental health, because I have been affected directly by those things, it makes me more apt to, more aware, I think, than a lot of people are. And then my own personal experience created a different level of empathy and compassion for me as well. And just because I know that people with disabilities, I know some amazing, brilliant, accomplished people with disabilities. And that's one of the reasons why I always share that I'm a woman with disabilities. My disabilities are very much invisible, mostly. You may not notice, which is for me even more important. Yeah. Because all of the things, that you read in my bio, all of those things I accomplished while being a person with disabilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and we honor all that you were bringing to this conversation. So thank you so much, Afrika. We're getting some good stuff into the chat, and I'm glad that you also amplified that. There's visible and invisible disabilities, and we have to hold both of those with equal weight of importance to this broad conversation of disability justice. I want to share something that Jonathan Hawk actually contributed to the discussion, and I want to just get your reaction to it. So Jonathan says, given that safe spaces at work can protect employees, I wonder if those spaces can allow psychological safety and be impactful within the organizational hierarchy as well, actually help people without negative bias and consequences. What are your thoughts and reflections on that?
Give it to me one more time.
Sure.
Wonder if the safe spaces can do what?
If the safe spaces can allow psychological safety and be impactful within the organizational hierarchy as well.
Okay.
Can it actually help people without negative bias and consequences?
Can it help people without the negative bias and consequences? I think so. It can help teams perform better. It can help leaders be better leaders. What we learn from creating that safe space environment that allows people to be authentic, it will help the organization as a whole. Absolutely, I believe that it can help across, the hierarchy of the organization. If one area that's important, think about it the other way. What if the people at the top of the organization are also part of the conversation? What if they're also sharing with us their own struggles?
Mm-hmm.
What if the leaders are willing to say, I have a disability, or I have a child who is special needs or has a disability, or to be able to speak to whatever their issues are. If they can openly say, I'm a gay man in the workplace, that freedom from the top of the organization to be open and authentic will create that same freedom trickle down to the rest of the organization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, really astute point. I think that sometimes we have this clouded judgment about what leadership looks like, and that group of leaders are completely immune to some of these systems of oppression. And while that is a place of privilege to be in a leadership role where you have that power, there are many of those leaders that are also battling with a lot of these challenges that come, that surface into these conversations of marginalized groups. And so I think that it's important for us to realize that we also need to make sure that we're considering that. I agree with you. That level of vulnerability that is displayed by leaders, it allows others to give themselves permission to be vulnerable and to share as well. And imagine what could happen in an environment when we all are freely sharing those thoughts and sentiments, where we can increase empathy and compassion and support. And so I'm definitely with you on that. I know that this disability conversation is really near and dear to you. And so I want to spend some more time unpacking that a bit. So you have personally and professionally, experience working with people with disabilities. And we know that that's a population that's often left out of the workforce due to bias. So what can employers do? I want to think about some practical things that employers can do to make sure that they are hiring and supporting people with disabilities.
So one of the things that employers can do is to make their environment, their cultures, their systems accessible. Because if you can't access the organization, it certainly is not encouraging for someone to want to join it, someone with a disability to join the organization. And so that can start with the way people apply to positions. If you've ever applied to a position and used an applicant tracking system, which I'm sure 99% of us probably have at some point, that can be a headache for anyone. But imagine someone who has a cognitive disability or who is low vision, and you have not made your systems accessible for those people, that you have not given them, through your communication about your job postings and such, to let them know, listen, if you need something, if you need an accommodation, that's a very important term. If you need an accommodation in order to be able to apply for the job, reach out to this point of contact and provide someone who can be a go-to source that will allow people with disabilities to maybe bypass some of the ones that need it, because not all of us need it. But to be able to bypass systems and go to an actual person, or to be able to download and submit a PDF version of an application versus using a system, because honestly, many of the systems that are used in human resources are not accessible. The systems that are used in any of like the HRS systems or HCMs are not really accessible. And I know that from my background in technology, that even, our learning management systems and the content that we want people to access once we hire them. So first of all, start with making it accessible for them to even apply. And then once you get people in your organization, make sure you're giving them what they need. Provide them what they need. So for instance, if you have someone who can go through your applicant tracking system, get through that, no problem. But when you ask, them to self-identify or, ask for their demographic information. And you say, well, okay, this person is a veteran, they've listed all these things, and then they self-disclose it. I am a person with disabilities. That you would then say, okay, well, what is it that you need? Are there things that you need in order to be able to do your job? And then provide those things or point them to resources where they can get them. I know for some employers, it may not be ideal for the employer to provide what the person needs, but there are organizations and agencies that do provide additional resources, tools, devices for people with disabilities so that they will be able to work. So those are two things that I would say. And then finally, I would say to make sure that when you're considering opportunities for development and opportunities for advancement, that you don't allow your bias or any limitations perceived about an individual to automatically rule them out, but to invite them to be part of, if you've got a program and there's an application process, open that program to all, and then let people know that you'll support them. If there's someone in that program that needs more support, that you will provide that or make sure that they get the resources that they need.
Great. Thank you, Afrika. So I see that Zoe Mitchell has a question. And Zoe, I don't want to move too quickly to present your question for you. If you're interested in unmuting and asking your question directly, I'll give you a chance to do that now. And if not, I'm happy to read it for you. Okay, I'm gonna take the silence to me to present her question.
She said her background noise is bad, so go ahead and read it for her.
Okay, all righty. Thanks, Zoe, for the question. So Zoe's question is around the topic of language. What are your thoughts or experiences around self-identifying language, like disabled women versus women with disabilities? This is a conversation I've heard a lot. And so what's your perspective on that?
I think that is an very individual choice about how you identify. Some people are not comfortable with the phrase disability. There have been people for years trying to work their way around that. I don't consider it anything that is an offensive term at all. It is a badge of honor. I am a survivor. My first, disability, I was struck by a car when I was 7 and had both my legs broken, and then one of them broken 2 other times to correct the issues that the accident caused. But because I've never allowed my disabilities to limit me, and I was not allowed to see them as things that there are challenges, of course, and there are barriers, of course, but I came from a family and a network of people around me that said those things don't have to stop you. And I believed that and embraced it, and I acted accordingly. So I don't allow anything, that may be one of the positive negative traits is that I can be a little bit relentless, maybe to a fault. But I think if we're talking about how people with disabilities identify themselves, that it really should come from that person. If someone is not comfortable with saying, I have disabilities, that's fine. I think there is some universal language that we should apply across the board, people first language that is uplifting. And so anybody who's in the DEI space that has learned anything about people first language or people with disabilities, not necessarily saying that you have a person, let's just say I have a person he's not a schizophrenic. I have a person with schizophrenia or a person with a mental health related disability. That is how I would phrase it. However, on the flip side of that, I've worked with people who are blind, and people who are blind don't say I'm a person with blindness. They say I'm a blind person, or I'm blind. And so it really is about what the community of folks have deemed comfortable for them and what the individual deems comfortable, for them specifically.
Yeah, no, that was beautifully stated. And I have repeatedly heard practitioners that are really connected to disability justice to share those sentiments. It really depends on the person and what their preferences are.
Yeah.
So Andrea has a question. Andrea, would you like to unmute yourself and present your question live? She says no. Okay. So
Andrea said, no, she would not.
So I am happy to present on your behalf. And okay, so her question is, Afrika, how will you let leadership know that being vulnerable and sharing their personal experience comes from a place of strength versus weakness? That's a great question, Andrea. How do you let leadership know that being vulnerable and sharing their personal experience comes from a place of strength versus weakness? And I'm sure this is related to our conversations earlier around we need leaders to be vulnerable because it gives others permissions to do the same. So for those who aren't willing to be vulnerable, I would imagine that perhaps it's because they see it as a sign of weakness. What's the narrative that we can use to help shift their framing and their mindset around that to seeing it as strength?
A lot of what I have to share about that will be drawn from my own experience and how I communicate. It is often seen when you're vulnerable as a sign of weakness. That is true. But I think communicating that it is not weakness. There's not a sense of victimhood. There is not a sense of that these things are things that can stop you. Kind of like what I said before, it is part of who you are. Yeah. If a leader can identify as a male, if a leader can identify as white or a woman or Latina, if you're already identifying yourselves in these other ways, then you're already putting out there who you say you are. Now there's a part of you that you're keeping hidden for some reason because you think it will be viewed as weakness or it'll be used against you. But what if you're really going to inspire and encourage people who have those same issues, who have those same challenges, those same barriers, who face those same biases? Why don't you make it safe? Why don't you make it more equitable by making sure that those people can have a voice and be heard? Because one of the most disheartening things is to feel unheard and unseen. And so by creating a space that allows everyone to be heard, to be seen, you're actually taking your leadership to another level. And it's a level that can impact your culture. And if it impacts your culture, it impacts your employees, your whole environment. And if it impacts them, then it will impact your clients and your customers. And if you have any interest in generating the billion, participating in any of the billions of dollars of revenue that, people with disabilities, generate from products they purchase and the things that they need. If you want to be part of those people's lives and have them essentially supporting your business, you shouldn't leave them out. And that should start internally because your employees they will be your champions. They will be the people that communicate to your customers exactly what you are, who you are, what your organization is, and who you are as leaders and as an organization. It's time out for leaders to be saying one thing and doing something else. Like the diversity inclusion talk is not really, nobody cares about the diversity inclusion talk. We want to know what's your diversity, your equity and diversity inclusion walk. And a lot of people want to start with diversity and inclusion, but they don't face the equity. For me, it's equity first.
Yeah.
I think if you start with equity and then there's an unnatural flow from that to the inclusion. Diversity, that's the mix. Yes, that is of course important. But for me, the most important thing to get to inclusion is equity. Yeah. And so I think leaders create that by being vulnerable, allowing themselves to put out there who they are, all of who they are, and allowing the people in their organization to do the same so that they can then be able to support and serve the clients and customers that those organizations have with that same authenticity.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit in just a second about the fact that you mentor young women, particularly in STEM. But before doing so, my colleague, Mark Travis Rivera, has a question. So I'm going to allow him
Okay.
to unmute himself
Okay.
and share. Go
All
for it,
right.
Mark.
Go, Mark.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I feel like, well, one, I want to give NWC some kudos. Since joining the organization as a disabled person who has physical and mental disabilities, I've been very empowered to show up as my authentic self. And we launched the whole Disability Justice Initiative, and we've been doing trainings and having conversations that I think, they always say it starts with representation, right? You need someone in the room who can represent or reflect the lived experience of the people you're trying to serve. And so I just want to mention that. My question to you, Africa, is, they say the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. Um, but when the Black woman has a disability, so often they are even more marginalized. And so how do we begin to have conversations that really are intersectional, but also recognizing that, like, for people with disabilities, we're desexualized, we're dehumanized, we are the unemployment rate is really high, and then COVID happened and everyone can work from home suddenly. So like, how do we deal with that? How do we start to deal with like these intersectional identities and the impact it has on the career growth and trajectory of someone with a disability?
I think we start by really digging into the data. Part of my approach is it's always data driven. I want to know, looking at those individual areas and then drilling down even further. So when you talk about being a Black woman with disabilities, I want to know, what does the data look like? And if I'm talking about from an organizational perspective or even from a societal perspective, I think the federal government needs to be taking a deeper look at those things and looking at the data around that, whether it's the Department of Labor, Bureau of Statistics, somebody needs to be down into the data about that. In the organizations, you need to be paying attention to the data about that. You can't just say, look at the limited area of men and women or the limited area of, gender and race. We need to be looking at the data across the board about everything that we care about, everything that we're trying to change. Start with the data that's available in the organization. And if I'm talking to employees, I think it's very important that employees, this may, I tell people, I look at things from both the perspective of the organization and the employee. And what's important for employees is to demand the data. Like, I mean, when you go into an organization and they ask your demographic information, they're not asking just because. They're often reporting that information to somewhere. If you're a federal government contractor or anything like that, or a state government contractor, there are requirements. It's like they want you to identify. Do you have people with disabilities on your team? Do you have women? Do you have people, they want you to identify that information. And so when you come into an organization and you're filling out the demographic information, it's like, if you're sharing that information and that organization is going to use it for a purpose that serves them, I think the employees have a right to know it. And a lot of employees are pushing for that. I think that's going to become increasingly important going forward, that people are going to want to know, what are you really doing? It's not about what you say you're doing. We want to know what you're actually doing. It's not about what your policies are. We want to know what your practices are. And so that's a way, to me, to focus on the intersectionality across the board, is to really drill down into the data. But you won't be able to do that unless you create a place and a space that's safe for people to disclose those things. So it comes back to me to culture and the overall culture of the organization and the level of psychological safety that is there, and the willingness of leadership to listen and to actually act on the data.
I'm glad you brought up the fact that, that data is being collected, often to be reported in some capacity. People want to do something with that data. At least they should be doing something with it. It should help inform other decisions. And what I want to amplify is that if we are one of those employees who may sit back and say, well, I don't want to answer those questions because I don't want people labeling me, then just consider the perspective of that data is used, at least it should be used, if those organizations are thinking intently about how to garner greater level of fostering of diversity, inclusivity, and equity. They should be using that in order to make really critical decisions around whether it's programmatic or operational to help create equity and inclusion. And so I just wanted to offer that up because I've heard many say, I'm not going to answer those questions, right? I'm gonna intentionally skip over those demographic questions, but it could be that you are limiting someone's ability to make some decisions that could directly impact a group of folks that are impacted. Absolutely. So I want to move and talk about mentorship because I know that's really big for you. And you and I exchanged some messages where you said, I look forward to connecting on this Friday. We have a lot of similarities. And the fact that you're really big on mentorship is something that I'm really big on as well. So I want you to spend some time talking about your mentorship efforts. And specifically, I know that in your bio, I shared with the group that you mentor young women in the field of STEM. So I want you to speak to that, please.
So for years, primarily high school girls, I've worked with them to mentor girls in technology, as well as across STEM, encouraging girls to participate in STEM careers, and not just STEAM. I won't leave out the arts, but I think it's important that those of us who are in the space that we have the experience or expertise that we would especially encourage girls in STEM, because it is very difficult to see yourself in a place where, as Mark said, where you're not represented. And for me, it's been about letting girls and supporting even women to let them know that just because you're not in a space doesn't mean that you cannot enter a space. I spent my first 15 years of my career in IT. I was, as a Black woman, often the only, whether in whatever organization that I was in. As a leader, I've been the only Black woman at my level in organizations. So certainly with an absence of people who look like you, it gives you this perception, that space is not for you. And so for me, mentoring in STEM is really about sharing the possibilities, introducing folks to what's out there, especially, young ladies, to let them know what's out there, and then letting them know that it's possible for them to pursue a STEM path. And one of the things that I do when I'm mentoring young ladies is we go through, what is it that you want to do? And they'll tell me, and I just, I will look at their actual career goals, whatever they may be, and I'll say, well, let's see how that relates to STEM. In a lot of ways, they may not understand, so if I'm interested in cosmetology, that could be related to STEM. Absolutely. And so it's really about creating for them in their minds a level of interest that'll make them go a little bit deeper and to make them more comfortable in those spaces. But it's important that those Black people, Black women, Latina women, people who, gay men and women who are not, LGBTQ, whatever, that you let people know wherever you are, that you also tell someone, that you become a mentor of sorts to someone else. That's very important. Whether it's formal mentorship or just creating a level of awareness to let someone know that they have paths to, these other types of opportunities, because it's so important. Right now, where we are in terms of the workforce, we have people who have fled hospitality careers and retail careers and food service careers and leisure, all of those things. I was watching earlier that they were saying how with COVID, so many people have left hospitality. Right. It's like, what do we do with that? Are those people going to return? And if they're not, what can we do to show them paths to other career paths? That's very important to me, because a lot of the skills that you have, you can they're transferable. They'll go with
Right.
you into something else you're doing. And it's a matter often for people who are not really aware about technology. I think a lot of people are intimidated.
Right.
And they think, well, I have to be this, brainiac nerd. I consider myself a nerd, so that's not a negative statement. They have to be a brainiac nerd to be able to move into, a technology career or something that is more STEM related. That to me is something that we need to break down that barrier because it's intimidating. There are entry points to just about every career path out there that don't require you to have a PhD in nuclear physics. You can start. I started in IT because of a mentor or because of an opportunity where a Black woman in telecommunications recognized my attitude and my aptitude and said, well, if you're doing X as an executive assistant, you can do, this kind of work if it's what you want to do. And she saw something in me and invited me to learn more about telecommunications and IT. And that's how I got started in that space. Also, one of my mentors, I think she's joined the call today. I have to give her a shout out. Her name is Pat, the trainer. After spending 15 years in IT, where I was volunteering and mentoring young girls, and I was going into underserved communities in DC, teaching Microsoft Office and things like that, because I've always been very focused on trying to help other people who are marginalized advance professionally so that they can advance economically. And so when I got ready to move out of the technology space, I took the path to go back to school to get more education and training in the HR and diversity inclusion space, certainly in the learning and development space as well. But my path to get to my next step really started through my mentor, Pat, the trainer, because it was a hard sell for a lot of people of how someone who was like this tech egghead analytical person would even, like, how do you transition into the people side of things? And so where I had a career that was probably 80% technical and 20% people to start, I've been able to flip it. And now it's 80% people, 20% technical. And a lot of that had to do with the mentorship from Pat the trainer and other mentors in the federal government. And I will say that the mentors that have helped me most have been other Black women, because I think they understood me and they were willing to support me in my vision and my goals. The other thing that I will note about the particular mentors that I've had that I would like to share is that I've tried sometimes to get mentors from people who are peers throughout my career, and that didn't work out so well. I found that most times the people who were more willing to mentor me were senior women who didn't view me as a threat, who didn't feel that, I was out to get something they had. And that is, it's a sad thing that we would operate that way, that some people operate from a perspective of there's only just a little bit. And
scarcity mindset. Yeah,
there's just this little bit of opportunity, and there's this, scarcity of promotion opportunity and all those things. And so it's important to me to help bring someone else up, to help to, teach someone, train someone, mentor someone, coach someone, because that's really your legacy that you're creating. And so now Ms. Pat's legacy will live on through me. I will be able to help other people. I've been able to, train executives, train employees, to help people, advance their careers because of what she saw and was willing to do to support me as a mentor. That is important regardless of your industry or focus areas, that you find someone who is marginalized, preferably someone you can identify with in some way, and someone who can identify with you, because that will help to create a stronger relationship and a higher level of trust to say, you can do this, and here's the way that you do it. Here's the path to do that.
That is so inspiring. Yes, we have to pay it forward. We have to lift as we climb. No one gets to where they are without having people in their corner and in their tribe helping to support them in their success. And so this has been incredible. We appreciate you sharing today. And by the way, as you were sharing, Pat Bowie did chime in, and she is here. She says, "I'm very proud of you as a woman of color, a mom, and a friend." And so I thought I'd amplify that. So we are maybe 60 seconds away from being at the top of the hour, and this hour has gone by tremendously fast, and I'm not surprised because I knew this was going to be a very robust discussion. But Afrika, we thank you so much for coming and sharing and being our guest and allowing this community to get familiar with you and your work. I want to give you an opportunity to close us out with any final thoughts or remarks. Maybe there's something I didn't ask you about today that you would gain value in sharing with this community. So I want to give you that opportunity. And just want to thank also our participants who have joined. We hope to see you again next Friday. Hope you have a wonderful long holiday weekend. And you have the final remarks, Afrika, so sorry.
That's okay. No problem. The one thing I would like to say, or a couple things, but the first thing is that as DEI professionals, that we don't give a false sense of a false sense to leaders that what they're doing is what they should be doing. I understand that the position that folks who are DEI professionals are in can be a little challenging, but I do encourage you all to hold leaders accountable, really at every level, as well as the employees, to ask for what you need. Those are the two things that I would say. You don't want to create an environment where people are closed off and are afraid in their organizations to talk about the challenges, because that really won't allow the organization an opportunity to improve. So that's important. I know that some DEI professionals I've seen have given leaders a false sense of security that they're doing the things that they should be doing, that I would encourage us all to really hold people accountable. Beyond that, I would say to employees that if you could focus right now on upskilling, it's going to be important. If you're not happy where you are in terms of your career, no matter where you are in industry, that you would focus on gaining some technical skills. Things are going to shift really fast over these next 5 years with automation, AI, and all of those things. Jobs where people are doing the work, many of them will no longer be in existence. And so this is the time and the moment to really upskill and to focus on gaining some training that will take you forward over the next 10, 15 years if you'll be in the workforce then.
Great. Thank you so much, Afrika. We're so grateful. Enjoy your weekend, and we look forward to seeing you all back here next Friday. Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Bye-bye.